This is gonna hurt me more than it's gonna hurt you.
Wake up!
Zack Snyder's Justice League was released on HBO Max in 2021 to huge success, becoming one of the most streamed movies that year, and was generally well received from audiences and critics. The movie made waves online and spawned the most tweeted hashtag of all time, hashtag restorethesnyderverse. And it's also worth noting that the movie did very well in home video sales, mainly in Blu-ray. It's a movie that I covered to death in 2020 and followed very closely, from the interviews to the trailers to the news and updates all the way up to its release. And personally, as a fan of Zack Snyder, it was pretty amazing to see a movie that media journalists claimed didn't exist. It's not every day that a studio goes back and shows the film how it was intended by the director. I can think of like 2 other times something like that happened. You got Ridley Scott's Blade Runner the Final Cut, and Richard Donner's Superman 2. Luckily for us, we didn't have to wait over a decade to get it. But now it's been well over a year and a half since its initial release, and I own it on Blu-ray. I think it's time to take a step back and take another look at the movie. Now, the reason why I said in the very beginning that this was going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you is because Zack Snyder is one of my favorite directors. I've talked about him a lot on this channel. I was one of the Snyder Bros following every image that dropped, every mention of it from the cast and crew members, and just hoping one day that it got released. And when it finally did, I watched it like 4 times the first weekend. It was something that Warner Brothers said didn't exist, something that they wouldn't let us have, but the stars aligned and we got it. So I have a personal connection to this movie, like many others in the fandom who followed it for years. So I'm sure they can understand that it hurts to take a step back and start to look at things objectively as possible, and to remove all personal bias to really take a look at the movie for what it is, and point out its flaws. And that's what I'm going to be doing today. In this series, I take a look back at a popular or hyped up movie and start to look at it as critically as I can, and see how I feel about it looking back on it now that we're months removed from its initial release. So yeah, that means there's going to be a lot of nitpicks, but that's kind of the point of this type of video, and this one's going to be a little different than my previous 2 entries, considering my connection to the film and admiration of its director. But I'm going to do my best. But that's enough chit chat. I think it's time that we go ahead and get into this. Also, of course, spoilers ahead. But if you're not familiar with what the Snyder Cut is or how it came to be, I'll do a brief history lesson for you folks. For those of you who already know the story, you can just skip ahead. Now, the year is 2017. Principal photography wrapped for Justice League. The film is slated for later that year in November, and Warner Brothers is breathing down Zack Snyder's neck because of the less than stellar reviews for Batman v Superman. So changes and compromises are being made about the direction of Justice League. Then a family tragedy strikes that causes Zack Snyder to step away from the project while it's in post-production, and that's where Joss Whedon is brought in to finish the movie.
Joss Whedon sucks.
After countless reshoots, re-editing, and even redoing the music with Denny Elfman, replacing the original composer Junkie XL, Justice League releases on its deadline, and viewers are met with a Frankenstein's monster of a movie that had conflicting tones, unpolished VFX, and overall felt like an MCU Avengers knockoff. After the theatrical run, Warner Brothers washed their hands of the whole ordeal and cut off contact with Zack Snyder. But then, rumors and murmurs start to circulate about a different cut of the movie that exists, Zack Snyder's original vision. Then images start to appear online from Snyder himself, showcasing several images and scenes that weren't in the theatrical release. And word starts to spread about this alternative version of the movie, the Snyder Cut. And thus, the Release the Snyder Cut movement was born. Then several Twitter hashtag campaigns, publicity stunts, and donation events later, it eventually got the attention of Warner Brothers themselves, who decided to work with Zack Snyder to finish his version of the movie, which mainly involved finishing up the CGI and VFX. And Snyder shot roughly 10 minutes of additional footage, bringing the total runtime just over 4 hours. It was released on HBO Max and was a huge success. And like I said in the beginning, the results spawned the biggest hashtag in Twitter history, and the reception overall was very positive. So that's the short version. And now that you're up to speed, it's time to take a look back at the movie after all the hype. Now, I assume you all know the premise or basic plot of the movie, but here is a quick refresher. After the death of Superman, Bruce Wayne starts putting together a team of other superpowered beings to help him stand against an impending threat he feels is coming to Earth. Then, long and behold, that actually happens. Steppenwolf arrives on Earth and starts wrecking shit, looking for these things called mother boxes that were left on Earth centuries ago. So the team must pull together and fight back against this foe. And that's the gist of it. Got it? Good. Now, this might sound crazy, but upon rewatching it for this video, there are only a few things that I can say were actually quote-unquote wrong with this movie. Most of it is actually minor. But there's one thing that really is the main culprit, and I'm more than certain you guys know what I'm talking about. It's the runtime. The movie is 4 hours, and even though I think it has really good pacing for its length, there are still things that could definitely be trimmed down, and some things that could be taken out altogether that wouldn't affect the overall movie. Personally for me, it's really the last 30 or so minutes when things start to actually drag a bit. And of course, the overload of slow-mo doesn't exactly help in a few scenes. But you've heard all that before. It's usually the biggest complaint, and unsurprisingly so. But I've decided to take things a step further and break down how we can make this movie shorter by going over what we can cut to save on time. And by doing this, we're not only shortening the total runtime, but now several scenes and sections can flow a bit better in my opinion. And by shortening some scenes, we can still convey the same information in less time. Now the scenes that we're going to be removing are ones that aren't entirely important, like the movie can still work fine without them. And we're going to be trimming up some other scenes so that they can convey the same information just in less time, as well as a few other scenes I thought could be a little shorter. So let's go ahead and get started. It's going to be fun. So the total runtime is 4 hours and 2 minutes with the credits, and 3 hours and 53 minutes without. So that's roughly 9 minutes of credits, and what we're going to do is get the 3 hours and 53 minutes down first, since that's the actual movie, and when we're all done we're going to add the credits back in after. Most people don't really watch the credits anyway, so that's why I'm using the time that's the actual movie, and then adding them back in afterwards. Does that make sense? I hope so, because I'm moving on. So the first thing is, we got to cut all the new footage that was filmed in 2021. I'm mainly referring to most of the epilogue stuff with the Nightmare timeline, and both Martian Manhunter appearances, him meeting Bruce Wayne, as well as a short scene after he talks to Lois. I want to keep the epilogue section because it sets up the heroes nicely, but I want the final shot to be Clark opening his shirt as he approaches the camera, and then Deathstroke meeting Lex could be like a mid-credit scene. So all these scenes together are over 8 minutes rounding down, so let's call it an even 8 minutes. Another thing to cut is this part where the women sing after Aquaman leaves. Not really necessary, you can just have the scene end once Arthur disappears, and this is roughly a minute. Next is Barry Allen's introduction scene. It's pretty cool, and we get to see Iris West, but the scene where he talks to his father and meets Bruce Wayne works just fine as a character introduction. We don't get to see Iris, but she's gonna appear in the Flash movie, or at least she's supposed to. Maybe she is. Either way, the scene is cool, but we don't really need it. The prison scene and meeting Bruce works just fine, and it's roughly 4 minutes cut out here. I'm a bit torn on this next one because I really like it, but you can actually cut out part of the scene of Cyborg exploring his powers, mainly the part of him helping a single mother. It's really here to show you that he likes to help people less fortunate than him, but we already saw a glimpse of that in his origin section when he was changing the grades for that friend of his who was going through some shit. So this part here is really just to drive the point home and to show us a little bit more about how he sees things and how his powers work. It's a great scene, but not completely necessary. You can just skip to him flying and smiling. So removing the single mother portion and the short scenes of the bear and bull fighting, you save about 3 minutes. Now the second scene where Steppenwolf is talking to Desaad doesn't actually add anything new. It just kind of has Desaad telling Steppenwolf to do what he was already doing, but better. Because in the first scene, Steppenwolf already tells the parademons to follow the scent of the mother boxes. So there's nothing new to really add here in terms of like the orders that he's given. Though it does give us a little bit more insight on he and Darkseid's relationship, and I guess it's here to remind the viewers, hey, Steppenwolf is still out there. And though I do like it because I like seeing Steppenwolf in the New Gods, it's not completely necessary, so you save about 2 minutes. Now earlier I mentioned about cutting out the scene where it's revealed that Martian Manhunter was talking to Lois. I want to also add that I think you can actually remove the whole scene between Lois and Martha talking to each other. I mean, the scene gives her more of a push to move on, but even without it, we get the idea when she visits the memorial site and tells the cop that this will be her last time. I think the Martha conversation is good, but it's really here to help push her to that decision. And even without it, I think it still makes sense later on in the movie when she does decide that's her last time to visit. So it's a little under 3 minutes cut out here. Next, after Superman gets his suit and flies over to see Alfred to find out where the group went, you can actually cut this out because with all the fighting happening at Steppenwolf's base, I think Superman is more than capable of flying around and listening and eventually finding the League that way. Plus, then it's a bit more surprising when he makes his badass entrance, going from this beautiful scene to this epic entrance. It's only like 30 seconds, not a big deal, but I think you can cut it out anyway. Alright, so those are the main scenes of parts that I would remove, which is roughly 21.5 minutes. Possibly a bit more because I was rounding down for most of the scenes. So let's just call it an even 22 to make the math easier, which means before credits, the new runtime is 3 hours and 31 minutes. And with the credits, we're at 3 hours and 40 minutes. I know there are people who would have cut out more, but for me personally, you could remove this stuff and the movie overall is mostly the same. But now let's go ahead and trim down some scenes.
He's a legend, a madman.
Okay, so I originally had some more scenes planned for this section, but then I kind of realized that I was kind of trimming down a few seconds here or there in a lot of scenes. So instead, I'm just going to mainly name 2 scenes because they are the more noticeable ones. First is the Amazons fighting Steppenwolf and the parademons. It's great, but there are a few things that could be shaved down here and there to give the scene more flow and just tighten things up. Like you could cut out the Queen telling the Amazons to gather the legions. You could also cut out her killing the parademons and grieving her fallen Amazon, as well as saving the one as she makes her escape. Then there was the slow-mo part of her staring at the building while it's crumbling. I think one reaction shot of her face was enough. You don't really need 2 before you see her run. So collectively, taking this stuff out adds up to about a minute, maybe a bit more. And then there's the Arkham Asylum scene where it's revealed that Lex Luthor escaped. You really don't need to show the guard walking all the way to the cell, and then have the inmate turn around and laugh for as long as he did, then have the guard run all the way back to sound the alarm. You could just briefly show the guard walking, then have him turn around, laugh for a few seconds, then have the guard turn around and hit the alarm. So you can really cut out about 30 seconds from this one scene. More if you actually cut out the guard running and hitting the switch, and instead cut away when the inmate turns around and starts laughing. And there are definitely a few other scenes you could shave down, like Aquaman going from the bar door to the dock and then standing there and letting the waves hit him in slow-mo. You could collectively shave 20 to 30 seconds off this whole sequence if you wanted to. I mean, really thinking about it, there's like, what, a dozen scenes where you could shave off 10, 20 seconds here and there. I guess my point is, there are definitely scenes and sections where you can take out a few things. You can trim out a few seconds, or in some cases, 30 or more. And all that does add up. I mean, the 3 I just listed here are altogether 2 minutes. But of course, I'm more generous impressed with the length and willing to let more things slide and stay in. I've actually seen some other people cut the movie down to a little over 3 hours, but as you can tell, I cut out about 25 minutes total. Personally, I can't really see cutting out that much, but I guess once you start tightening up every scene, those 2 to 10 seconds start to add up. Like I said, in the 3 that I listed, that's 2 minutes right there. And like I mentioned earlier, the pacing for its length is pretty solid. The first nearly 2.5–3 hours just kind of fly by. Only a few spots where it dragged a bit too long. And I feel all the new footage isn't necessary at all. Well, of course it wasn't necessary because it was filmed in 2020 or 2021, I believe. So looking back on it, yeah, there are definitely things that could be cut out to shorten it, and it does drag a bit in a few spots. But for its length, it's really impressive that it doesn't feel like a slog the whole way through. I think Endgame actually felt longer, and several times is dragged, and that movie was 3 hours. I think having it sectioned off into parts really helps, because each chapter contains its own series of events, kind of like a TV show. So each part is contained, but there's an overarching story and conclusion that they all built towards. So I actually see why there was a possibility that this was going to be released as a miniseries, with each part being its own 40-minute episode. Now, even though I spent the last couple of minutes saying what could be taken out to tell the story faster, the truth is, the length doesn't bother me because it's a movie that we weren't supposed to even have, or even exist. And I think Zack Snyder decided to give us everything that he had. If it were 2017 and this was going to release in theaters, I think he would have drastically cut it down to around 3 hours. Then the Blu-ray would have had the extended cut. Because if you remove the new footage that was added in later on, then you're left with what? Around 40 minutes of extra footage that goes past 3 hours? But given the context and the history around this film, I would just keep the runtime at 4 hours. But that of course is me speaking as a fan of Zack Snyder, and following and being part of the fandom. But for this video, I can admit that the length is very daunting to people, and there are definitely scenes and sections that you can trim up and take out completely. And I feel like if it was closer to 3 hours, it would please a lot more people. So that's the big main issue I addressed, and that's really what most people bring up when they talk about the movie. But there still are a few other things that I want to point out and discuss, because I'm being a nitpicking prick, so might as well, right? A couple of these range from being issues with the plot and story, down to some very small minute things that don't really matter, but I'm gonna go ahead and mention them all. Alright, so the best way to do this is to start with the bigger complaint, and then just work my way down to smaller ones. Which means we're going to start with the history lesson scene. It explained that Darkseid lost the battle to Earth and retreated. Then thousands of years later, the Mother Boxes awoke and called to Steppenwolf. And then Steppenwolf discovers that this is the planet that Darkseid lost to all those years ago. Steppy tells him that Earth is the planet that fought back, and is the one with the anti-life equation carved on its surface. And Darkseid's kind of like, Earth? Oh shit, okay. Then he tells Steppy to conquer it, then he'll drop by later to claim his prize. Of course, Steppenwolf fails, and Darkseid tells Desaad to ready the Armada, meaning they're gonna go fly to Earth. So the question I have that's been popping in my head ever since I saw this is that if he knows where Earth is, how come he never just returned to it? Did he not know that it was called Earth all those years ago? Well, I mean, he had to, because he hasn't been to Earth ever since he lost to it, but then at the very end of the movie, he clearly knows where Earth is and how to get there. And if this is the only planet he ever lost to, that means it's the only planet that has mother boxes on it that were left there. So when Steppy told Desaad that the mother boxes called to him and brought him there, you think that'd be a red flag for Desaad to tell Darkseid, yo, Mr. D, remember those boxes you lost all those years ago to that one planet that defeated you? Well, those boxes are awake now. It's not until after Steppy finds out it's the planet that has the anti-life equation on it that Darkseid takes interest. But Desaad and Darkseid should have already known that this was the planet with the anti-life equation because it's the only planet he ever lost to, because it has the mother boxes that were left there. So they really should have known just right away. I'm also surprised that Steppenwolf didn't know, because he was around back then. It's mentioned by Desaad that after this defeat, Steppenwolf attempted to take the throne. So I guess what I'm saying is, I get that they lost the mother boxes and they went to sleep, so they weren't active. But he had to have known that the planet was called Earth back then, because at the very end, he's ready just to go fly there. No mother boxes needed to boom tube in. So this planet has to be in our navigation systems or something. They know what it's called and know where it is. So why did they never go back? Some might say I'm overthinking it, and yeah, I kinda am. But if you have an answer to this, let me know, because I started thinking about it and I really couldn't get it out of my head. But since we're talking about Darkseid, I guess I'll throw this into the mix as well. I like this history lesson scene overall, and it was pretty cool to see Darkseid take out a Green Lantern. But I would actually like to see him do a bit more here. Like wreck some more foot soldiers, some more Atlanteans, some more Amazons. Really let him go loose and show us that he's not to be fucked with. He's taken out by literal gods, so I'm not annoyed by that. I just want to see him do a bit more badass shit. And since we're talking about fights, I'm a little disappointed with the fight between Steppenwolf and Superman at the end. I mean, it's still badass and cool seeing Superman give him a beatdown, but he took him out a bit too easily. I mean, he shows up and knocks his dick in the dirt, and I would just prefer Steppenwolf to put up a better fight. I really just wanted to see some more Superman hand-to-hand fighting, like in Man of Steel. I love that shit. Like, imagine Supes actually throwing hands with Steppy, just trading some blows. It's a small thing, but it would have been a cool way to take it to the next level. I mean, as is, it's still pretty badass.
The more you fuck around, the more you're gonna find out.
Is anyone else kind of surprised that Batman really didn't have a backup plan for if things went wrong with bringing back Superman? I mean, when Superman is wrecking the league, Batman is just standing there, and he easily could have been killed. I figured with Aquaman expressing his concerns about bringing someone back from the dead, and them not being the same when they come back, I thought he would have like a contingency plan or something. Although Bruce does tell Alfred that he is operating strictly on faith this time around, so I guess he really was just hoping for the best. Now, the Flash is the comic relief character, and overall he's not as annoying here as he was in the theatrical cut, but I'm not gonna lie, he's still a bit annoying at times. I didn't think all the jokes really hit that well, but honestly, it's all made up for with that Speed Force scene at the end. That's an Oscar-winning scene if I've ever seen one.
I mean, it's like what lives in my pocket, right? Paper monster hungry.
Shut the fuck up.
And I guess I'll mention that there are a few bits of spotty CGI, but it's really just the new footage that was filmed. Like, Martian Manhunter definitely isn't as polished as Darkseid or Steppenwolf. Same with Cyborg and the background in the Nightmare timeline. I mean, granted, they filmed it, a couple months before the movie came out, and the movie overall looks good. It's just really these parts that are kind of rough. Now let's talk about the music for a little bit. When Snyder got the green light to finish his movie, the original composer, Junkie XL, came back to the project, and the music overall is pretty good. It has its moments where it feels really epic and triumphant. I don't think it's as good as Man of Steel or Batman v Superman's, but still pretty good. But there's just one track that annoys the hell out of me, and if you've seen the movie, you know the one.
Get out of my sight.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty annoying, and it comes on almost every time Wonder Woman does something. I thought it was pretty neat at first, but then by the end, it really overstayed its welcome.
Let the bastard come. I'll stab.
And I think that'll about do it. Ironically, most of these complaints and nitpicks were things I've already mentioned in previous videos, so I guess this was kind of a way to like consolidate all my grievances and add a bit more to it. Now with all that out of the way, it's time to move on to my conclusion and final thoughts. Now, even though I point out all this stuff, I have just one thing to say.
Do I care? No.
After looking back on it, I can acknowledge and understand why many have an issue with its length, and I can see how it can be shortened. And even though I point out several little things that annoy me personally, and a few plot points that make me scratch my head, it doesn't ruin my experience, and I still enjoy it. There are still so many epic and badass moments, and I definitely love the look and style that Snyder brings to the table.
You love my style? Awesome. Well, I can definitely give you that.
And I think as a whole, these three movies fit together very nicely, and I love all of them. You might notice that I didn't compare it much to the 2017 version, and that's because the differences have been covered to death, and the majority definitely agree. Yeah, Snyder's version is miles better. So it wasn't really worth bringing up and going into detail about, but I did want to at least mention that of course I think Snyder's movie is much better. Not really much of a shock or a hot take there. Now I know Warner Brothers says this is a trilogy and don't really have plans to continue this story, but with its ending and all the stuff that it sets up, I would love to see more. A Justice League Part 2 and 3 with Darkseid as the main foe, like it was setting up. It would be epic. If they ever announce that, I'm all in. So even a year and a half later, I still really enjoy this movie. And yeah, definitely could change a few things, but like I've been saying this whole video, it's a movie that they said didn't exist, one they weren't gonna let us have, and just chuck it and forget it. So the fact that it was released and has such a big fandom around it blows my mind. Now it's not my favorite Snyder movie, but it's definitely great. And compared to other comic book movies in general, it's definitely top tier, at least in my humble Snyder bro opinion. But now it's time I ask you guys, what do you think about Zack Snyder's Justice League? Now we're a year and a half removed from it, you had time to process it and rewatch it. What are your thoughts on it now? Leave a comment and let me know. And of course, I'll give a nice big shout out to the channel members. If you're interested in becoming a channel member, click the join button down below and check out the perks. If they interest you, consider joining. Or not, it don't matter.
None of this matters.
Affleck was the bomb as Batman, yo.
Go ahead, Mom. Take away my Nintendo Switch. No matter how hard you try, you can't unfuck the Thanksgiving turkey.